Hello, hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Move University Social Justice for Social Distancing. This is a very special episode today as we are doing a Young Texans town hall with my special guest, Congressman Lloyd Doggett. Congressman, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, sheltering here at home in East Austin and trying to follow these guidelines and work with all the people that are being impacted here in such a big way. And while I can't qualify any longer to be one of your young Texans, I'm pleased to be talking and look forward to getting questions and comments about the tragic situation we're all in.
An honorary young Texan. You've come on the stream. We can name you an honorary. It's totally fine. But yeah, we can just jump right into it. And so just so you know, we've been collecting questions all week from social media. People have been sending them to me on Instagram. So that's how we collected these. And if you're watching with us live on Facebook, make sure that you're commenting your questions. And we'll be dropping some resources in the comments from the Congressman's office as well. But let's just get started. So as this COVID-19 pandemic continues, many young people have questions about what the federal government is doing to respond. We know the main response so far has been the CARES Act. Can you give us a bit of an overview about that legislation and how it came to be?
Sure, Charlie. And as you know, Congress is always better about the names on bills than necessarily what's in them. But there are some good things in this bill. It is an 880-page bill in which we were given, or on which we were given an opportunity to review for a little less than 24 hours. And it was put together very quickly. So there's some flaws in it. I had concerns about it, and I think the implementation by the Trump administration generally has been poor. There's 7 main groups that we're focused on. Individuals with relief checks, small businesses with a loan program and with what's called the Paycheck Protection Program, big corporations that got bailouts. We tried to get and got a few strings attached to try to protect taxpayers on those. And also hospitals and public health, some assistance for state and local governments, not enough, and education, some education monies that I know will be of interest to participants today. We've got a chance to talk about some of these provisions. I think the focus always has to be on health, because until we get to a resolution of the health issues, which have been aggravated to a tragic extent by the incompetence, the delays, the lies of the Trump administration, but until we solve that problem, we're not going to be able to get our economy going back to anywhere like where it was before.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And definitely contrary to what we're hearing from some governors right now. So definitely an important note.
Right. And Charlie, I want to add, because I've really been focusing on this, that one of the provisions that was in there that got tucked in by Senate Republicans helps the 43,000 richest Americans, people that earn more than $1 million a year. And there was more that they got stuck in this bill to help those people than all the money that we gave to hospitals or all the money that we gave to state and local governments. So Senator Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island and I have filed legislation to repeal this provision. And we previously forwarded a communication to the Treasury Department trying to find out what role the Trump administration itself had in getting this provision, and whether the Trump family will benefit from this the way they did with special provisions they got in the 2017 Trump tax law.
So some great oversight that you're really leading the charge on as always. So I really appreciate that. Move works with many college students across the state. What do you see in the way of federal support specifically for college students, many of whom are dealing with a crippling student debt, or have been displaced from their campus closures, or maybe listed as dependents and not receiving those federal dollars? What kind of support do you see for college students?
Well, there is some support, but we could do with a great deal more.
Yeah.
The CARES Act cancels payments on federally held loans through the end of September, and it suspends interest accrual for those loans during the same period of time. So that's a little bit of short-term help. All direct loans, that is ones that have been issued since 2010, that are federally held, but older federal family education loan program loans that are privately held are not covered by this exemption. Should you choose not to make any payments on your student loans during this time, you are protected from a negative credit reporting, and public servants will still earn credit through the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. But there's much more that needs to be done to assist students with debt. A whole second area that's pretty significant is that under the bill that under the CARES Act, we provided $14 billion. That's billion big time for higher education. All institutions that get that money must spend at least half of it on emergency financial aid to students. Texas, UT, my alma mater in Austin, got about $31 million from this program. Texas State in San Marcos, which I represent, got about $31 million. And so that means that about half of that money, $16 million, is available for emergency financial aid. And we are inquiring with those institutions, asking how they're going to use that aid. There is still a great deal more that needs to be done, and we have some further bills coming up. I hope we can be successful in providing some more student assistance.
Yeah, I think that's great to know. I hadn't heard that about the university system, so it's very important, and people should make sure. One more question from me, and then we'll switch over to some from the Facebook stream. An issue I know that you care about deeply: election protection. We saw from Wisconsin that our election system is not at all prepared for this pandemic. What efforts are happening at the federal level to expand online voter registration, vote by mail, and polling place protections?
Not nearly enough. And I think we can see after Wisconsin, after what happened in the Iowa Democratic caucuses, knowing the Russians and other forces are still eager to interfere in our elections, that we need much more. We faced significant resistance, of course, from Mitch McConnell to all of the reforms. I go back to having been very involved with the For the People legislation that we had at the beginning of this Congress that McConnell buried in his graveyard. But in the Cures Act, we did provide additional funds to the states to secure their elections and to deal with other COVID-19 related issues. I think Texas is getting over $20 million. And so we need to keep pressing to look at how to expand under existing law. The subject of a lawsuit, as you know, in San Antonio at the moment, vote by mail, and other things that Texas could do. I remember, as you do, because MOVE has been such a leader on ballot access and fighting these Republican suppression efforts, that Texas used some of the federal money that it got previously for elections to try to purge the rolls, which fortunately was defeated with efforts from MOVE and LULAC and other groups in court. But just because we send money there doesn't mean it will be used to accomplish this objective. You and I have talked about this, but there has never been a time before we ever heard anything about COVID-19 when our democracy was more under threat than it is this year from the Trump administration. We know Republicans everywhere are trying to suppress the vote, trying to call the voter list. And now with the added problem of the pandemic, and people risking their lives in Wisconsin to actually go to the polls, we've got to find ways to open this up and not leave this most critical election to a handful of people who go out to vote if there's no other way to participate.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That's something that we've been talking about a lot, that this pandemic hasn't just created problems, it's highlighted existing problems. Our elections were already broken. Our healthcare system was already broken.
This pandemic, people of color that we have seen, intensified focus. Yes, all of these issues, from that to voter suppression, we've had them for years, but COVID-19, this pandemic highlights and intensifies the effect. And hopefully it intensifies our determination through groups like MOVE to do something about it.
Yeah, I think that's a good transition to one of our questions from the Facebook stream. This question is from Raven. She's based in Houston. We know COVID-19 is disproportionately affecting Black and Brown communities. What actions can Congress take to support communities of color during this pandemic?
Well, this falls directly under my work as subcommittee chair for health on Ways and Means. And we see that disparity that has existed in issues like birth-related mortality for women, in different kind of testing that hasn't gone on that recognizes certain racial and ethnic issues in the way testing is done, in developing our workforce. But now we really see it in one state, one city after another, that the burden of this pandemic is borne by people of color. And we know that there are many factors involved in that. The one that I am focused on the most, and I was working on it today, is the question of health access. To assure, in this case, that governors don't take our federal money out of these emergency pieces of federal legislation and at the same time cut access to Medicaid. I was able to get over 150 of my colleagues to join me in opposing the effort that we know Senate Republicans made already to try to eliminate what are called maintenance of effort requirements, so that we don't see higher eligibility and lower benefits under an already stingy Medicaid program. This is the time for Texas to expand Medicaid, which Governor Abbott could easily do. It is a time for opening a special enrollment period under the Affordable Care Act so that more people could enroll there. I called again with a substantial number of colleagues for the Trump administration to do that. Instead of that, they've continued their attacks on Obamacare. So I think assuring that all people, but particularly people of color, economically disadvantaged people of all races, can get access to healthcare is really important. Yeah. We made the first effort in Congress to assure that free testing is available for all, but we have not solved the problem yet of free treatment for all that are associated with COVID-19.
Yeah, it's definitely where we need to go next. And this next question I received a lot on Instagram. A lot of people have been asking about this. Loans that were meant for small business under the CARES Act went to a lot of giant corporations. I think Ruth's Chris being the one that really made the big headlines. We can never go to Ruth's Chris anymore, which is a bummer. Not that we were going before, but you know, as a result, these relief funds are already exhausted for many people that were going to apply for them. I know a lot of small nonprofits as well. Are there talks of a second coronavirus relief bill, and how is Congress going to protect those small business loans?
Well, it's a really big problem, and the rollout of both that, the unemployment benefits, the Trump administration, I think, has done a very sorry job about this. They could have prioritized the smallest businesses. We know that small business is the heartbeat of the American economy, but they could have focused on the many small businesses that have less than 5 or 10 employees. They did not. And in fact, there's an indication that some banks were encouraging customers who didn't have a loss. There are a few businesses, not many, but there are a few businesses that actually have had a spurt in growth during this time. You can think about that in terms of delivery services and other types of online businesses. They encouraged some of these businesses to apply for loans they didn't need because they could basically shift their payroll for 2 months to the federal government. And the Trump administration, which always has a bias in helping the biggest ones, as you mentioned with Ruth's Chris Steakhouse and some of the other chains, the biggest groups got a big chunk of the money. In fact, I believe the numbers are that about a fourth of the money went to 2% of the top small businesses. Charlie, as we're speaking, the Senate, I believe, is supposed to be taking up a bill to replenish the Paycheck Protection Fund. We have had to insist that it also provide additional money for healthcare through hospitals, and that we get a national testing plan, which, as you know, the president has resisted trying to shift responsibility to anybody but himself. I have seen reports as recently as today that some banks think that they have so many of these applications pending that they may run out of money again this week, even if we approve the bill. So there's much more work to be done. We have to engage in active oversight of the way the programs run. but I think we have to ask questions as well in shaping any future legislation about, is it targeted to those who really need help, because so many people are out there struggling to keep a small business afloat.
Yeah. I think that really leads into this next question. You've been long a champion for expanding access to healthcare, and these bills did do a little bit to give money to hospitals and to help with some of that free testing. This was a question from one of our advocates, Angel, and he asked, what are you doing to advocate for long-term protections for uninsured people and fixing our broken healthcare system?
Well, it is really broken, and it's been broken for years. I served on the health subcommittee at the time Obamacare was approved, and recognized that while it was a major advance, that it was full of flaws. The circumstances were we had to accept a version from the Senate at the time that has many of the deficiencies that we're still having to defend. I think the first thing is we have to preserve what we've got against sustained Trump assault in the courts. The courts could come down with a decision on that in the very near future, and I'm concerned about that. We need expansion of Medicaid in Texas, and we need to be sure, as I mentioned earlier, that the governors don't take federal money and cut it. To have more uninsured people in Texas, more uninsured children than any other state, is really awful. I think we see right now the benefits in a pandemic more than ever. If we had something like Medicare for all, a system that would assure coverage for everyone, we would benefit. Because, you know, when someone who is undocumented, someone who is poor, can't get access for testing and can't get access for treatment with this highly contagious disease, now more than ever, it's not just them for who we should certainly show some humanity, but it's all of us who are adversely affected. So I support universal health care. I think we have to find a way to get there, whether it's done through Medicare or some other way, protect what we've got and add as comprehensive and as universal program as we can get the votes to do.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I'm going to jump to another question from Facebook. This question is from Alyssa. She asks, what can students and families do if their financial situation has changed drastically since they filed their FAFSA and their financial aid package is no longer sufficient?
Well, that is really important, and they do need to refile with the new information. And I'm continuing to work on FAFSA. We made some progress. This mainly help people applying in the future to try to eliminate about 25 or 30 questions with some legislation that actually got passed around the Christmas holiday period. And we have continued to try to work with the Education Department and the IRS to see that that simplification happens. But I think that there is an opportunity to refile information if your financial situation has deteriorated, as has happened with most everybody.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Another question from Facebook is from Erica, and she asked, what advice do you have for students or parents whose income and savings have been affected by the pandemic?
Oh boy, it's a tough question.
Yeah.
Because so many people have. Certainly taking advantage of the modest relief package. And one of the other areas that is a problem for students is the fact that those who are 17 or older who are claimed as a dependent on their parents' return cannot get that relief check. And we've had calls all day long and over the last several days from people that have problems getting their relief check. It is modest, it's a step forward. For any student who's out there been trying to get a job, questioning whether they will return in the fall, unemployment may be a possibility. We did increase temporarily the benefits to up to $600 a week. And so anyone in a job who's had a job recently may want to explore whether they're eligible for unemployment. And the changes that were made in unemployment are good in another sense, because there were a lot of gig workers out there, an Uber driver or a musician, a contractor, and we made special provisions so that they can now qualify under the emergency unemployment legislation. I think we will continue working on other kinds of tax legislation and other kinds of direct assistance. One that I'm exploring in my office right now is the American Opportunity Tax Credit. That's something that I got approved during the last crisis way back in the early Obama years. That provides a $2,500 credit, some of which is refundable for tuition and education expenses. And I'm hoping to introduce legislation soon to expand that credit, particularly the refundability, since most people don't have a lot of tax liability anymore, but where it would come directly back to try to cover and provide an incentive for students to return in the fall in whatever form college courses may take then.
Yeah, I think that's great. We got several questions about that, so I'm glad that you hit on that point. I think really this pandemic has also, as we kind of have spoken on, highlighted a lot of the pre-existing issues we have in this country, whether it was leaving out undocumented people from that stimulus package, the lack of solutions we've seen for our unhoused neighbors, I think, especially in Austin. Is there one specific policy area that you're prioritizing in this era? Anything that's really jumped out to you as especially important?
Well, I think that in the immediate future, everyone in my office in San Antonio, in Austin, and in Washington is working on some aspect of this pandemic. Mm-hmm. Our focus principally on health and trying to see that it's great that the hospitals got help. It was necessary, but I'm concerned about hospital patients, about people who have the misfortune of requiring medical treatment and can get a surprise medical bill outside of their network, about the overall cost that are imposed for getting treatment. So that is an immediate focus, as well as a significant amount of our resources are devoted to talking with individual small businesses about breaking through the barriers that Trump administration delay and mishandling of the program have presented. I would say over the longer term, as we look at this and the impact on our environment, that the climate change issue remains very real and the pollution issues remain real. As this crisis has extended, it has not slowed a bit the Trump administration determination to eliminate as many environmental regulations as they possibly can. More pollution of our air, our water, and more heat for our planet, and a total unwillingness to plan for the dangers of climate change. So again, over the longer haul, as we get through this immediate problems, I think we need to look at what happened as a result of a reduction in the use of fossil fuels, and how do we get a grip on a problem that everyone should be reminded. You know, on New Year's Day, as we were celebrating the new year, no one really fully appreciated how much this could shut down our economy and change our lives totally. And the same thing will happen with climate change if we don't prepare.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We really appreciate your work. We're right beside you there. One more question from Facebook that popped out at me that I think is very important. Any plans to support the post office, the U.S. Postal Service? I think we know this will have effect on small businesses, on the expansion of vote by mail, which is going to be absolutely critical. Any plans there?
Well, the Trump administration seems to be committed to privatizing just about every basic function of government.
Yeah.
They resisted vigorously in the CARES Act our providing funding for the Postal Service. The Postmaster General says that the Postal Service will, I guess, run out of all resources in September if we don't provide some support. Great editorial this week in the San Antonio Express News about this very issue and what a vital stake we have in the Postal Service. Certainly, you know, vote by mail won't happen if we don't have mail. But beyond that, so many people in disadvantaged neighborhoods, so many seniors, so many people in rural areas, especially dependent on getting postal service. And so somehow we have to overcome the Trump administration opposition to maintaining a public service. For some reason, you know, if it's a public service, it becomes, if it's a public school, it becomes a government school. If it's Social Security, it's questionable because it has social in the name. And we have to not let this ideology block people from getting basic governmental services that we've relied on in this country for decades.
Yeah. there was a great thread I saw this week from someone with the post office that was talking about how corporations will always serve people in cities, but who is going to help rural communities, right? It is always the post office that gets that last mile for folks. So definitely important that we're keeping up support there. Okay, I think we're down to our last question, Congressman. And every week with these Move University posts, we always release book and movie recommendations for folks that are quarantining at home, who are social distancing, have a little bit of time on their hands. Any suggestions for folks about what they should be reading, watching, local food to order?
Well, I think this RBG movie about, well, there's a documentary about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, whose health we pray for daily, is a good one. I saw one the other night through Amazon Prime called The Report, about the CIA and its torture in dark sites. That is a reminder of, even though things are horrible now, that they weren't all that great in the Bush-Cheney years for some people. And this is about a dynamic Senate staffer who persisted to expose that, a young person who really made a difference. In terms of reading, it is a great opportunity to catch up on what's happening with books as well as with film. So I'm still putting in my home office about 12 hours every day, but I like to break around 9:30 or 10 and catch a little bit of a movie or a documentary. So I wish folks well. It is a trying time. I think the main thing is that even though we are social distancing, we can still have social engagement, just like this program, and remain committed to social justice. Everybody's most concerned about their health, their family, their friends, of course, but we've got to continue to be creative in coming up with additional ways to be engaged, to save our country from Trump, and to move forward on some of these key issues like expanding healthcare, dignity for immigrants, and addressing the threat of climate change.
I totally agree. I really appreciate you coming on. Do you have any info on where people can reach you, your office?
Yes. I really want to encourage people to contact us at our office at doggett.mail.house.gov as the full email address, but you can go on Facebook with any number of social media possibilities to reach us. And even if you are not directly in our district, we're pleased to hear from you, invite you to participate and get our periodic updates about the battle with the Trump administration that goes on day in, day out to try to save our country.
Yeah, we will drop that information on how to reach you in our comments, and we'll also put that on social media so people can reach out. You're a great congressman, not just to your constituents, but everyone in this community. Thank you so much for coming, Congressman. I really appreciate it.
I believe in MOVE. I think you're moving Texas forward. We've got a lot more work to do, but we're getting there, and I think together we can accomplish it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for watching. We'll be back next week with another edition of MOVE University. Stay safe and wash your hands.